Good morning, everyone. Jumping on here today to talk to you about more real estate terms. Part 2. Last time we talked about under contract, pending, and the various terms around that. Today, I am here to talk to you about the word contingency. We have that word in several different spots in our real estate contract. First and foremost, sometimes there's a contingency for the buyer to sell another property. Next up, you have a title contingency, an appraisal contingency, and a loan contingency. Lastly, we've got an inspection contingency. So within the contract, each contingency has a certain number of days that we need to work through. The shortest being your inspections. So when you go under contract, first thing you do is you get your inspections ordered with the building inspector of your choice. Once you have that inspection, you get a report and you review that report. You talk with your agent and you go over any items that you might be concerned about enough to have the seller address. Generally speaking, we address safety or structural concerns. This contingency gives the buyer the right to collect their earnest money back and walk away from the property in the event that something comes up in the inspection that is too scary or too big for you to tackle or makes you uninterested in the home any longer. That inspection is 10 days. Inspection contingency, is 10 days. And once you submit your inspection notice to the seller side, the seller has 10 more days to let you know how they're going to work through that or whether they are or are not. So you end up with a total of 20 days to negotiate that. If you can't come to terms on whether it be a credit or repairs, then the buyer gets their earnest money back and they can walk. So the cost that you would be out as a home purchaser in that scenario would be the cost of the building inspection, which in the grand scheme of things is, a drop in the bucket as to what you're looking at spending on the house. So the next contingency is the title contingency. The title company is responsible for clearing title on not just the property, but the people involved as well. So buyers and sellers both, their names get run through the title company to ensure that there's no liens or lawsuits against the buyer or seller that would inhibit them from the purchase or sale of the property. And then, of course, the property itself. The title company is making sure that there are no liens from any previous contractors, or a lot of times when there is a divorce involved with a seller, there is a decree that states how the proceeds are split and or certain things that must happen when that property is sold. So the title company is responsible to kind of discover all of that. Your seller in this situation has a document that they'll complete when you go under contract. We call it the TRID letter. This gives the title company the information that they need in order to run this title search. And then, of course, they'll reach out to the buyer that they're running the title search for and collect any information. Most of the time, the last 4 of your social security number, maiden names, anything like that. Lastly, you've got an appraisal contingency. So this is also part of the contract. Generally speaking, our standard contract has an appraisal rider attached. This is really regardless of whether the buyer is paying cash or getting a loan. If the buyer is paying cash, it is their responsibility to order a third-party appraisal. Many times the agent involved will help with this. If you're getting a loan, then the bank is going to order from a third-party appraisal company. the purpose of the appraisal is to find out what the true market value of the home is, and they do this based on the comparable homes, and they use homes with comparable features. If they can't find anything, then they do a plus and minus based on what the subject property does or does not have up against the other properties that they are comparing it to. So for example, let's say you've got a house next door that recently sold. It's exactly the same, except it's got a 2-car garage versus the one you're selling with a 3-car garage, and you're getting $8,000 more for the 3-car garage. So the appraiser is going to determine the value of that third bay and give that other property plus or minus so much value based on that, so that they can determine a true value of the subject property. Many times when the appraisal is short, the listing agent will go in and look for other comparable properties that were not used in the appraisal to support the value on the contract. I've done this a number of times in my career. Sometimes you find success in getting the appraiser to adjust. Other times, there is a refusal to adjust, and the buyer and seller have a decision to make. The buyer can choose to bring the extra money to the closing table. The lender is not going to loan any more than what they've appraised the property for. So, just round figures here. Let's say the property appraised for $300,000. The lender's not going to loan any more than that $300,000. Let's say the contract price was $305,000. The buyer is now looking at bringing that extra $5,000 in cash over and above the appraised value. Otherwise, they need to get the seller to renegotiate that price. And it really just depends on the seller and the seller's situation and how well they did. Maybe there's a backup offer that doesn't have an appraisal contingency. Many things can come into play here, but for the most part, the buyer and seller either work out a price, whether it's the appraised value or somewhere in between, and or they decide to mutually release from the contract. In that situation, the buyer does get their earnest money back. Buyer's earnest money is protected through the contingencies related to the contract. So if there's ever a negotiation and they can't come to terms, as long as you're within your deadlines, the buyer's earnest money is protected. I always tell my buyers, unless you decide 5 days before closing that you wake up and decide you've made a big mistake and you don't want to move or don't want to purchase this home, that's about the only risk you run, as long as you're staying within your contract deadlines. So I would love to answer any questions anyone has, and I would also love to earn your business in the real estate world. If you've got business that you are looking to do in terms of buying, selling, or if you're curious about investing in real estate, my team would love to help. My phone number is 636-578-9738. You can also reach us at dreamlivingproperties.net.